Those able to survive without the rhythms of the day-night cycle might manage to make it. Some animals, like certain insects, are known to be able to adjust to drastic changes in their environment. However, the lack of food sources would pose an even greater challenge. The collapse of ecosystems would leave very few places for organisms to thrive. Still, in isolated pockets, life might find a way to persist. The harsh frozen poles would become almost inhospitable, while the permanently sunlit side would scorch everything. However, some areas might be able to sustain new forms of life, as the Earth would likely undergo a transformation where a few ecosystems could emerge in niches. These survival zones might form in the places closest to the boundary between night and day, where temperatures might be more manageable. But even in these areas, life would have to cope with extreme conditions. The creatures that managed to live here would likely evolve to adapt to very long days and nights. So with no rotation, the Earth's atmosphere would be drastically different. Winds would no longer follow their usual paths, making weather unpredictable. The usual currents of the oceans would cease, causing temperature imbalances. It's likely that new weather systems would form over time, ones that are driven by the differences between the permanent day side and the permanent night side. But these new systems would be violent and unpredictable. Tornadoes, hurricanes, and superstorms could emerge in regions where hot and cold air masses would collide in intense ways. Over the course of many generations, life might find ways to adapt to these violent systems, but the immediate future would be extremely unstable. What about the possibility of human survival? If humans were able to adapt to such extreme conditions, the world as we know it would be completely different. Communities would likely have to relocate to these survival zones where they would need to build shelter to protect themselves from the unrelenting heat on one side of the planet and the freezing cold on the other. These new human settlements would be isolated, dependent on any surviving plants and animals that might be able to withstand the extreme shifts in temperature and the broken ecosystems. Agriculture would need to be redefined. Without the consistent sunlight and rotation, traditional farming would be almost impossible. People would have to develop new ways of growing food, possibly relying on artificial light or creating completely new farming methods that could handle the altered conditions. Similarly, energy sources would need to be rethought. Wind power, solar energy, and hydroelectric power might all be drastically reduced or become impossible due to the unpredictable weather and lack of reliable water systems. If humans could adapt and form small, isolated communities, it's possible that some technology could be salvaged or rebuilt. In isolated pockets, people might create new ways to communicate or develop entirely new technologies. But this would depend on the availability of resources, which would be incredibly scarce. However, even with these isolated successes, the overall picture remains grim.